The ache had been whispering to him for weeks, a low, insistent murmur that lived beneath bone and muscle, somewhere he didn't like to think about. At first, Ezra Cole treated it the way a rancher treated most discomforts, by ignoring it. Pain was an old companion on the plains, as common as dust in the throat or cracked skin on the hands. You worked through it, slept through it, cursed it under your breath and moved on. This ache, though, had a way of lingering after the work was done, of reminding him of itself in the quiet moments when there was nothing else to focus on. It followed him through the long days of riding fence, when the sun climbed and burned the land flat and colorless. It throbbed faintly as he leaned into the saddle horn, counting cattle, checking water, mending wire where storms or stubborn steers had torn it loose. Sometimes it faded enough that he almost forgot it was there. Other times it sharpened suddenly, like a nail turned the wrong way, forcing a hiss through his teeth and a pause he pretended was nothing more than catching his breath. Ezra was a man who prided himself on knowing his own body. Years of hard labor had taught him every creak and weakness, every scar and stiff joint. He could tell the difference between the soreness of honest work and the warning pain that meant something was wrong. This one troubled him because it didn't follow the rules. It wasn't tied to a bad lift or a long ride. It came when it pleased, quiet as a snake in tall grass, then struck when his guard was down. That morning, the sky hung low and pale, washed of color like an old photograph left too long in the sun. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind that made even the cattle uneasy. They stood clustered near the fence, heads low, tails flicking at flies that weren't really there. Ezra noticed it as he rode in, felt it settle on his shoulders like a weight. The ache was already present, a dull pressure that made him shift in the saddle more than once. He dismounted by the corral, boots hitting the dirt with a thud that sent a puff of dust into the air. As he straightened, the pain flared, hot, sudden, and deep. His breath left him in a sharp grunt. He bent forward, one hand gripping the corral rail, the other pressing low against his body as if he could physically hold the pain in place. For a long moment he stayed like that, eyes squeezed shut, jaw clenched hard enough to make his temples ache. The wind stirred the dry grass beyond the yard, whispering against the boards. Somewhere a crow called, the sound harsh and lonely. "I've been aching down there," he muttered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Saying it aloud made it feel more real, less like something he could dismiss. He didn't like that. Ezra straightened slowly, forcing his spine upright inch by inch. He rolled his shoulders, testing himself, then took a step, then another. The pain dulled but didn't vanish. It lingered, watchful. He told himself it was just another reminder that he wasn't young anymore. Men his age didn't heal the way they used to. Things took longer. Things hurt. Still, a prickle of unease crawled up his back. He walked toward the bunkhouse, boots heavy on the packed earth. The building squatted at the edge of the yard, weathered boards gray with age and sun. It had sheltered him through more winters than he cared to count, through storms that rattled the walls and nights so cold the breath froze in the air. He'd always felt safe inside it. Today, it felt like a place to hide. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, then shut it firmly behind him, sliding the wooden bar into place. The dimness wrapped around him, cool and smelling faintly of soap, leather, and old wood. Dust motes drifted lazily in the narrow beam of light that slipped through the small window. Ezra stood there for a moment, listening. The ranch sounds were muffled now, the low shift of cattle, the distant creak of a windmill turning. His own breathing sounded too loud in his ears. He went to the wash basin and pumped water until it flowed clear and cold. He scrubbed his hands harder than necessary, as if the ache might be something he could wash away. The skin on his knuckles split, thin lines opening and bleeding, the water turning faintly pink before running clear again. He barely noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere, circling the pain, prodding at it the way a sore tooth draws the tongue. With hands still damp, he lifted the hem of his shirt. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. His mind rejected it, tried to rearrange the image into something familiar. The skin low on his abdomen had darkened, an uneven bruise spreading like a storm cloud. It looked old and new at the same time, colors layered wrong, deep purples edged with sickly yellow, as if it had been healing and worsening all at once. Ezra's breath caught. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing, fingers hovering just above the skin. He didn't touch it right away. Some instinct told him not to. Then he saw it move. It was subtle, barely there, a faint rise and fall beneath the skin, like the slow breathing of something asleep. The ache answered it, flaring in time with the motion. His heart thudded harder, faster, and for a terrible moment it felt as though whatever lay beneath his skin was keeping pace with him. "No," he whispered, the word dry and thin. He stumbled back a step, then steadied himself against the table. His chest felt tight, as if the air in the room had thickened. He'd seen injuries in his life, bad ones. He'd seen flesh torn by horns, crushed by hooves, burned by fire and sun. He'd seen sickness take men apart from the inside, slow and merciless. None of it looked like this. His gaze flicked to the small mirror hanging on the wall, its edges chipped, its surface warped just enough to distort reflections. He took it down with shaking hands and angled it, twisting his body to see from different directions. He needed to be sure. He needed to know his eyes weren't lying. The bruise was there no matter how he looked at it. The faint pulsing remained, steady and patient. Ezra swallowed hard. A memory surfaced unbidden. A steer once found bloated and stiff, something wrong beneath its hide, unseen until it was too late. Another memory followed, darker, a ranch hand years back who'd complained of a strange pain and waited too long, pride keeping him from riding for help. Ezra had helped bury him, the ground frozen hard as iron. Outside, a sudden, piercing scream cut through the air. Ezra flinched, nearly dropping the mirror. The sound came again, high and panicked, unmistakably animal. A horse. One of his. The scream ended abruptly, as if cut off mid-breath, leaving a ringing silence behind. His pulse hammered. He lowered the mirror slowly, listening. No further sound came. The ranch lay still again, too still. For a moment, he considered opening the door, checking the yard, making sure everything was as it should be. His hand even twitched toward the latch. Then the ache surged, sharp enough to steal his breath, and his focus snapped back inward. Whatever was happening outside, this was happening inside him. Ezra forced himself to breathe, long and slow, the way he did when breaking a nervous horse or facing down a storm. Panic wouldn't help him. He needed to think. He needed to understand. He studied the bruise again, closer this time. The skin felt warmer than it should, almost feverish. The pulsing grew more noticeable under his gaze, as if aware of being watched. A chill crawled through him. That had nothing to do with temperature. He straightened, lowering his shirt, though the image burned behind his eyes. His jaw set, the muscles there jumping as he clenched his teeth. Waiting had never been his way. Out here, hesitation killed. You acted, or the land acted for you. Still, a sliver of doubt wormed its way into his thoughts. What if he was wrong? What if this was some sickness he didn't understand, something that needed a doctor, not a blade or brute force? The nearest town was a long ride, and doctors were expensive men who asked too many questions. Ezra looked at his reflection in the mirror, at the lines etched deep around his eyes, the gray threading his beard. He looked tired, older than he felt, but his eyes were steady, and beneath the fear and confusion, there was resolve. He hung the mirror back on its nail and turned away from it, as if breaking eye contact might keep the thing beneath his skin from knowing he'd seen it. He moved to the small window and peered out. The yard looked normal enough. No sign of the horse that had screamed. No sign of disturbance. The wind had picked up slightly, stirring dust and grass. A sense of being watched settled over him, heavy and unpleasant. Ezra stepped back from the window and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. The ache throbbed again, deeper now, more deliberate. It felt less like pain and more like pressure, like something testing the limits of its space. His hands curled into fists. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be ignored. Ezra lit the lantern with hands that refused to steady, the match flaring bright before settling into a weak, wavering flame. The glass chimney was smudged with old soot, casting shadows that crawled along the walls as if they had lives of their own. He set the lantern on the table and stood over it, breathing slow, counting each rise and fall of his chest until the pounding in his ears dulled enough for him to think. The ache had changed. It was no longer a distant throb but a concentrated pressure, as though something had shifted after being discovered. He could feel it distinctly now, not just pain but intent, a presence that seemed to push back when his muscles tightened, that responded when he moved. The realization chilled him more than the sight of the bruise had. Pain was familiar. This was not. He reached for the bottle on the shelf, the one he kept for nights when the cold cut too deep or sleep wouldn't come. The cork popped with a dull sound that echoed too loudly in the small room. He took a long pull, the raw spirits burning down his throat, bringing tears to his eyes. He welcomed the burn. It grounded him, reminded him of something simple and real. Ezra wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and set the bottle on the table beside the lantern. Its glass caught the light, reflecting a distorted version of his face, drawn, pale, eyes too bright. He looked like a stranger, someone cornered. He began laying out his tools with deliberate care. The blade came first, wrapped in a scrap of oiled cloth. He unrolled it slowly, revealing steel worn thin from years of sharpening. It had dressed game, cut rope, trimmed hooves, and once, long ago, saved his life when he'd used it to dig a bullet out of his own shoulder. He trusted it more than he trusted most men. Next came the needle and thread, boiled earlier that morning for mending tack, now pressed into a different kind of service. He placed them carefully, parallel to the blade, as if order alone might keep things from spiraling out of control. Last, he set down a strip of leather, gnawed and scarred from previous uses. He didn't remember the last time he'd needed it, but he knew he would now. The lantern hissed softly. Outside, the wind worried at the boards, making them creak and complain. Ezra listened, half expecting to hear something else. Footsteps, another animal's scream, a knock at the door. Nothing came. He lifted his shirt again. The bruise seemed darker now, edges more pronounced. The pulsing had grown stronger, unmistakable, a slow, deliberate movement beneath the skin. His stomach churned. Every instinct he had screamed at him to stop, to leave, to ride hard for town and let someone else take responsibility for whatever this was. No, he said aloud, his voice rough. You don't belong. The words felt important, even if he didn't know why. He said them again, louder this time, as if asserting a claim. The pulsing faltered for just a heartbeat, then resumed, stronger than before. Pain lanced through him, sharp and blinding. Ezra grunted and staggered, catching himself on the table. That was enough. He took another swallow from the bottle and wedged the leather between his teeth. His jaw tightened around it, muscles trembling. He positioned himself in front of the mirror, lantern light throwing his reflection into stark relief. There was no room for hesitation now. He had made his decision the moment he laid out the blade. Ezra pressed the tip of the knife against the darkened skin. It felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain, resistance there where there should have been none. His hand shook violently. For a split second, doubt surged again, one last plea for mercy from some quieter part of himself. Then the ache flared, white hot, and something inside him shifted as if pushing outward. Ezra screamed. The blade cut, and the pain exploded, tearing a sound from him that seemed to rip the air apart. His body convulsed, knees buckling, but he held himself upright through sheer will. He worked fast, guided by instinct and desperation rather than thought. The world narrowed to the mirror, the lantern, the unbearable heat and pressure that threatened to overwhelm him. The ache surged wildly, then changed, becoming frantic, erratic. The pulsing turned into something closer to thrashing, the skin beneath his hands moving in ways no living flesh should. Ezra's vision blurred, tears streaming down his face, but he did not stop. He could not. Stopping felt like death. Time lost meaning. There was only breath and pain and motion, only the desperate certainty that if he faltered for even a moment, whatever had taken root inside him would win. He felt it recoil, felt resistance give way, felt a sudden, sickening release that nearly made him retch. Then, abruptly, the pressure vanished. The ache collapsed in on itself, leaving behind a raw, burning absence. Ezra slumped forward, barely catching himself on the table as the blade clattered from his numb fingers. The leather strip fell from his mouth, soaked and mangled. He gasped for air, lungs heaving, every muscle shaking as if he'd ridden for days without rest. The room smelled of iron and spirits, sharp and overwhelming. His ears rang. For a long moment, he couldn't bring himself to look in the mirror again. He didn't want to know what he'd see. He didn't want confirmation of what he'd just done. When he finally raised his eyes, his reflection swam into focus slowly. He looked hollowed out, skin gray, eyes rimmed red. Whatever movement had been there before was gone. The skin lay still now, obedient and lifeless. The pain, though intense, was different, cleaner, honest, the kind that made sense. Ezra sagged to the floor, back sliding down the wall until he sat hard on the boards. The lantern's light wavered above him. He fumbled for the bottle and drank again, smaller sips this time, hands shaking too badly for more. The spirits burned, but they also dulled the edges of the pain, wrapped it in a haze that made it bearable. Outside, the wind rose, moaning through the yard. He could smell iron on it now, carried from the open window and scattered across the land. The cattle shifted, uneasy, hooves scraping dirt. Somewhere beyond the fence line, something moved, retreating, disturbed. Ezra listened with his eyes closed. His heart still raced, but there was a strange calm beneath it, a deep, bone-level certainty that whatever had been inside him was gone. He didn't know what it had been. He wasn't sure he wanted to. Names had a way of giving things power. Minutes passed, or hours. He wasn't sure. Eventually, the shaking eased enough for him to stand. He cleaned himself as best he could, movements slow and careful, every step a negotiation with pain and exhaustion. He bound the wound tightly, hands sure despite their tremor. This was familiar territory. This he knew how to handle. When he finished, he doused the lantern and let the room fall into shadow. The sudden darkness was a relief. He stood there for a moment, listening to his own breathing, to the quiet creaks and sighs of the ranch settling around him. He unbarred the door and stepped out onto the porch. Night had crept in while he'd been inside, the sky deep and starless, clouds rolling low and fast. The wind cut cool against his skin. Ezra drew his coat tighter around himself and scanned the land, eyes adjusting, senses stretched thin. The ranch lay as it always had.